So what's some of the craziest stories from Afghanistan? Both, maybe both vicious and funny. Because I've heard some interesting sort of funny stories from friends. Probably too. I'm just trying to remember which ones there are. But I think there's some amazing ones that I think people would find interesting.
Well, we went through. I mean, Guy, how much time do you have in this podcast? You want to tell war stories? But I mean, the one is you talk about the day that I was wounded. I call it like my alive day. We were perched on a hill doing what we call an observation post, an OP. I had 24 soldiers on the ground, 5 gun trucks. I had an interpreter with me. We had 2 240 Bravo machine guns, a Mark 19 and 250 calibers. We had our trucks in 360-degree security with my men perched in between the trucks behind cover and concealment. We set in at night, did everything right. Sun came up. I used my forward observer, called for fire on places that I thought the bad guys would be. Back then we called them harassment and interdiction fires, OH&I fires. We don't do that anymore, but harassment and interdiction fires. So if the enemy's there, we want to let them know that we know they're there, and we're just going to shoot those hilltops to show them. Yeah. And so we did that morning. I hit this place where it was a cave site where the enemy was moving rockets from Pakistan through this cave into Afghanistan. So we hit this cave with some 105s. And when we did that, man, it was like hitting a hornet's nest with a baseball bat. And we just started getting pounded. I mean, all I remember probably about 30 seconds after hitting that cave site was waking up in a smoldering hole probably 20 feet from where I was. And I remember the first thing that I remember when I came to was like a burning piece of shrapnel on my leg about this big. And I was so out of it that, I was knocked unconscious. And like, I talked about this recently, but this is only really the second time I've ever really talked about this. But I thought that I was going to die. I thought that I was dying, and I just remember I could have sworn I felt like God with me there. I know and I'm always afraid to talk about it, man, because there are going to be people out there that oh, you're crazy, you're a nut job.
I think that'd be comforting to a lot of people as well.
I just could have sworn I felt it. Yeah. And I could have sworn I felt my grandfather, who is like, my grandfather was like a second father figure to me. He died the day before I was supposed to go to Afghanistan. So, like a St. Christopher medal, he wore one given to him like in Christmas of 1945, wore it every day, never took it off. Yeah. I was wearing it in Afghanistan when I got hurt, and I could have sworn I heard him just saying, get up, wake up. And I remember things came back to me real slowly that day. It was like somebody was turning the sound up on a TV that was just static, and one of my squad leaders, or one of my team leaders rather, was sitting on my chest, like slapping me in the face, and he had this big smile on him, and I'm like, what was wrong with you, dude? And he's like, sir. I'm like, what? He's like, you got blown the fuck up. And I'm like, what? I'm like, what? And so he grabs me by my chest and pulls me up, and I'm sitting there on the ground with my legs splayed out in front of me like a 2-year-old or something on Christmas morning. And I'm looking around at just the devastation that was being wrought on our position. And we were getting hit by airburst mortars. So mortars that blow up in the sky and the shrapnel rains down on you. I think 2 of my trucks were immediately knocked out of commission. And as we later looked and analyzed this attack, all of my key leaders were knocked out of that fight within the first minute of the engagement. Wow. And myself included. I had my platoon sergeant who was behind a huge tree. And some of these trees just in Afghanistan feel like they're just like untouched by humans. They're almost like prehistoric, huge. Platoon sergeant's laying laying in the prone behind one of those things, just pointing to his back, screaming to me that he got hit, and his back was like covered in blood, and he had got hit with a piece of shrapnel back there. And my platoon sergeant, a guy by the name of Greg Greason, I was a second lieutenant. Like, I didn't really know what I was doing. I was lucky to have guys like my sergeants and even my soldiers who taught, coached, and mentored me every step of the way. The fact is, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for those guys teaching me everything I know. But so my platoon sergeant was like my partner in crime. Like, he taught me everything, and he was the voice. He just, he was my go-to guy, and he was already hurt. And so I knew it was real serious. And so I remember standing up, and as I stood up, I had this clear fluid leak out of my ears and my nose, just gushed out. And I remember doing this and looking at it, and I was like, well, it's not blood. I'm good to go. I'm still in the fight. Ran back to my truck, and I started calling fire on those target reference points that we talked about. And I started calling fire on danger close on our position. I don't know if you know what that means, but danger close means that the rounds are going to be exploding around you and that your guys on the hilltop should take cover. And as I'm trying to surveil the battlefield and try to keep my head down because mortars are still raining down all around us. And I remember like looking at my hand when I was laying on the ground, Don, the level of fire was so intense. I mean, I'm looking at my hand, it's laying on the ground just like this, right? And I'm watching bullets land between my fingers, kick up dirt, land between my fingers. And later that day, I would look at my uniform. I had bullet holes in my pants of my uniform. I mean, it was just
like an act of God that you weren't.
I mean, this is when I learned the whole philosophy of like small bullet, big sky. Like it's really freaking hard to hit something. It really is. Like even with machine guns, and so, and the importance of good cover and concealment. But I'm looking out at everything. Got a couple of trucks that are already out. So immediately as a leader, I'm thinking I'm not just going to be able to leave this hilltop. We can't leave our equipment out here because we got top secret radios out here with our ComSec. ComSec is basically like all the frequencies that we use to talk. Can't leave that out here for the enemy. So I'm stuck here on this hilltop with 24 guys. And I'm looking at those two hilltops. I'm on a hilltop, but I got two hilltops directly east of us, like just right on the Duran line, which is right on the border of Pakistan. And on both of those hilltops, so we're getting pounded with airburst mortars, but on both of those hilltops directly east of us, you had 3 machine gun nests, like each on each hilltop. And they had us in a wicked crossfire, and they're hitting us with plunging fire. So they were in an elevated position. They're actually arcing the rounds down on top of us. So that like if you're, even if you're in what you call a Ranger grave or a hasty fighting position, you're laying in the prone and bullets are landing on you, you know? So what I was thinking, I was watching them fire, Don, and it was like, they weren't just firing. They weren't just firing on cyclic. They were talking the guns. Like one gun would fire and then stop. The next gun would fire and then stop. And the reason for that is because they didn't want to melt the barrels on their machine guns. And so I'm thinking, okay, I'm on the phone calling for fire, calling for air support, but I'm also thinking like, okay, they hit us with airburst mortars to keep our heads down while they simultaneously emplaced 2 different support by fire positions.
Sounds much more sophisticated than everything you read about, where it's like, oh, you know what I mean?
Yes.
You hear about catching these guys, with farm animals and stuff like that.
I
know. It's got to be, but like this sounds like a really. I'm sure you have some of those stories too, but
yes, I can I'll tell you one after this. But you're absolutely right. These weren't farmers with pitchforks. This wasn't a ragtag insurgency. These were hardened Afghan fighters that fought against the Russians in the 80s and the Afghan Civil War in the 90s. Now their whole life has been war. In fact, your average Afghan fighter or foreign fighter has 10 years combat experience on your 18-year-old American private. So I'm thinking to myself, okay, hit us with indirect fire. They simultaneously place 2 support by fires. They're attacking just like us. What are they going to do next? If I'm them, I attack. And like no sooner did I think that 2 platoon-size elements, 40-man elements, rushed down the hill, like through those support by fire positions, down their hilltop into the valley below, and started bounding up towards us. So about 80 enemy. Wow. And that was just about the time that the rounds started landing danger close. And I remember running out to where the contact is heaviest because I just believe that that's where a platoon leader is supposed to be. If you're leading men in combat, if you aren't where contact is heaviest, you're a fucking useless leader. Like, you're a platoon leader, your job is to lead your troops and lead them boldly. And so I get out to where the contact is heaviest, the easternmost portion of our perimeter. 3 of my soldiers had already been shot in the head out there, but every single one of them was still in the fight. And I'm looking up at a guy named Mike Emmerich, who was up in the turret, and he had taken a bullet to the head. Kyle Lewis, it was his very first patrol ever. And he's out on patrol with his up in a gun, he gets shot in the head, falls down in the turret, stands back up, no helmet on his head, but gets right back on his gun. You hear lots of different, advice or philosophies when you're talking about leadership in the Army, and you always hear that good leaders are supposed to inspire their troops. Well, that day, I learned that great troops inspire their leaders, and that's sort of become a bedrock of my leadership philosophy moving forward. Is that leaders should draw the inspiration from those that they lead. It's all about service, right? Being 100%. A leader is about service, and so. Watching these rounds land danger close, they're vaporizing these guys, who, by the way, this isn't a human wave attack. They're bounding, right? With squad level elements, team leaders and a squad leader yelling commands. They're bounding up the hill after us. The rounds are hitting danger close. I'm watching 2, 3 guys be vaporized by these artillery rounds that we're dropping, and just 2 or 3 more running through the shot and the shell, sprinting up the hill to our position. Nothing of what we had was stopping them. There were just so many of them. We were outnumbered 10-1. And I'm thinking, man, I want to give the command to fix bayonets, and then I realized that the Army didn't issue us bayonets for that deployment. So, and so that was outnumbered 10-1 on a hill in Afghanistan, 24 guys on the ground. I think the fight ended up being something like 10 hours before we got everything off of that hilltop. But it was Apache helicopters with the call sign fullback, that 2 Apache helicopters that came in and saved us, along with my company commander, with a platoon, with a Delta platoon that was in the area, responded as a quick reaction force on the hilltop, augmented with ANA, 2 Apache helicopters. And then, when you talk about bringing the full might of the U.S. military to bear, we brought in a B-1 strategic Lancer that dropped like 12 2,000-pound JDAMs on the cave site. And then and only then did we get them to break contact. So that like 485 days of stuff like that. Minor details.